Well, hi there, and welcome to this webcast. My name, if you're not familiar with it, is Jonathan Foust, and I am here to guide a meditation and give you a little introduction to a talk I think you might find relevant and helpful. At least that's my hope. The talk is on when to step up and when to step back, which seems kind of poignant given the times that we're living in. Before we launch into our meditation and into the talk, first of all, our thank yous and acknowledgments to the Insight Meditation Community of Washington and to Glenn Harrison, our producer, for making all this technical stuff work so that you and I are connecting right now. Also, a big thank you to our mindful movement leader, to Rita Moran, and to Ray Manioki, Mindful Dialogue. The Monday night experience, if you want the whole thing, starts at 6:30 Eastern Standard with Rita leading mindful movement, which will massage you and prep you for this meditation and talk at 7:30 Eastern Standard Time. And then afterward, to create a sense of integration, to connect with like-minded people, you can join this group led by Ray Manioki, kind of a master of facilitation and space holding. Those links are on my website and on my webpage. So feel free to check that out. I have a monthly newsletter that I send out a kind of a compendium of my talks and my best photography for the month. And as always, thank you for your support. This is all offered freely, so no one is denied access to these practices and teachings. Myself, Rita, Ray, we love this stuff. We do it because we love it, because it's changed our lives, and we have been the recipient of these free offerings as well. So thank you for your support if you feel inspired to do that. In the meantime, let's take some time to gather our attention, to settle and explore what's happening on the inside. You might like to reach your arms overhead. Feel free to stretch out, let out any sounds. Ask yourself how your body would like you to move or adjust. And then when you're ready, you can close your eyes, and you might, with your eyes closed, just slow down, deepen, smooth out your breath. If it's helpful, and many people find it helpful, for the next minute or so, inhale slowly to the count of 4. Exhale slowly to the count of 4. Matching the length of the inhalation with the length of the exhalation, and notice how this will create a sense of deepening absorption, a heightened awareness of this whole feeling state on the inside. And notice what happens when you slow down, when you deepen, and when you smooth out the breath. You might notice on each exhalation anything that might relax or soften or let go in any way. You might notice both this heightened awareness of what's happening, but also a heightened awareness of who you are as the one who is aware of what's happening. In your own time, you might let any control of the breath fall away and give yourself this time to just observe the breath. Where do you feel the breath the most predominant right now? And you might sense on the inside, if it's possible, to soften the muscles around your eyes. And could you now imagine all expression softening and melting away from your face? Feeling the volume of your lips, the softening through the jaw, the weight of the tongue. And can you feel the weight and the volume of your arms, letting your attention flow from the shoulder joints down through your elbows? And the elbows down through the wrists. Softening, relaxing your palms. Feel the backs of the hands. The volume of your fingers and thumbs. Is it possible to relax deep down in the belly? For the next few rounds of breath, notice how intimately you can feel the breath down in the abdomen. This rising on the in-breath, falling on the out-breath. And sensing the soles of the feet and the heels, the volume of your feet. And is there anything right now that could relax or soften or let go even more? Noticing now the movement of the breath on the inside, perhaps how subtle the breath is when you're deeply relaxed inside. Where do you feel the breath the most predominant? Noticing the sounds around you. The vibration of sound, 360 degrees. And feeling from the inside as you soften the palms, any sense of pulse or tingling or vibration or aliveness here. And you might inquire, how much more could you relax and feel right now? And for these next few minutes, you might choose one of these points of contact, the breath or sound or the feeling in the palms. And let this be your doorway back to the here and now. This breath, these sounds right now, and this felt sense in the palms. As you refresh your practice, you might inquire, what could soften right now? What could relax? How intimately can you refresh this point of contact with your anchor of breath or sound or feeling? Re-arriving, re-relaxing. And you might notice both the foreground of your anchor and the background, this sense of all that's changing and moving. And you might explore as you sense 360 degrees, all that is changing right now. Is it possible to let things be just as they are? To be the observer, the witness of change? How much more could you simply relax and rest in presence? Nothing to do, nowhere to go, just simply to be relaxed and at the same time alert. And letting go of all technique now. Just simply relax and feel. Just receiving the moment exactly as it is. And then very gently in your own time, you might deepen your breath. Let your body move, stretch in any way that feels good for you. As you're ready, you can open your eyes, or you can remain with them closed. I was raised a Quaker, and one of the jokes Quakers would say is, don't do something, just sit there. And it brings up a very interesting question. When do we step up in response to what's happening outside of us? And when is it more skillful to actually step back? That's the topic of the following talk. With all that's happening in the world, we are constantly in this question of, is it skillful to engage, or is it more skillful to step back and to respond from perhaps a different place inside? We are constantly in this question of, is it skillful to engage, or is it more skillful to step back and to respond from perhaps a different place inside? I hope you find the following talk helpful. Many, many blessings in your practice and in everything you are called to in this life. I'm bad on dates, but I think it was around 1981 or something like that. I decided to join the Peace Corps. Something was calling me. And I was living in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I just finished grad school. I was a year teaching. I sold my car, bought a motorcycle, was having a great time doing lots of rock climbing and all that good stuff. But something in me thought it was just time to do this. So I went through the application. I got a position teaching in a university in West Africa, and I was pretty psyched. One of the things I had to do, though, was to get my physical. And the place to get your physical at that time was in the recruitment center for all the armed services. And so I showed up at my appointed time, and there were maybe about 20 all young men. And as we were sort of marching through the entrance, you had to call out what branch you were going into. And so as we're walking through, I could hear the guys in front of me, Marine Corps, Army, Navy, Marine Corps, Navy, Army, Peace Corps. And when I said Peace Corps, everyone kind of, the guy clicked, checking things off, kind of looked at me out of the corner of his eyes. And a number of guys were like, what the heck is that? And so I had a very interesting morning talking with all these kind of younger guys who were going into all these different services. And a lot of them were like, what the heck is Peace Corps? And so we had this whole conversation, and it was so interesting because as we're going through, they had the drug tests. So there was a guy there saying, take a cup and fill it up, take a cup and fill it up, take a cup and fill it up, as we were kind of like marching through. And we filled our cups and turned them in. And at one point, we were all in our underwear, and we were in a big circle. And then I don't know who it was said, everyone turn around, drop your shorts to your ankles, put your knees on your put your elbows on your knees. And they turned out the lights, and the guy came around doing whatever he had to inspect. But I remember as I was kind of bent over with my elbows on my knees, having a conversation with a guy to my left and right, asking them, where they were going and what they were going to do, and them asking me about Peace Corps, and one guy saying, God, I wish I'd known about Peace Corps. What was so interesting was, as I was talking with these guys, there is a point to this. So many of these guys were just saying, like, I said, well, why are you joining now? And a lot of them just said, like, I need this. I need discipline. I don't have any focus. I know this is going to be really, really good for me. And I thought, how interesting, because I was called in some way, to Peace Corps and service and what I thought it would be. And each of these guys was also called to really take action, to commit a number of years of their life. So I'd like to talk a little bit tonight about when to step up in life and when to step back. And I'll share the punchline of the whole talk if you don't want to listen to the rest. You're the only one who knows. And there are some ways to help you kind of refine that question as you make your way in your own journey. So there are 4 main topics I'd like to explore. One is about how this is a practice of self-awareness and self-diagnosis. And some thoughts on understanding stimulus and response, because therein lies a lot of freedom. Some thoughts on what it means to step back, not only in your life, but in your practice. And some thoughts on what it means to step up. So, I had an interesting conversation in a group recently about spiritual practices and how to support a spiritual practice that's could cultivate more wisdom and more compassion. Someone in the group was sharing about the power of concentration practices you'd read about, concentration practices, the jhanas, the deeper access states, and he thought, what, this is what I need. And so he kind of made kind of a rigorous schedule for himself to do these really, really focused concentration practices. And then he kind of gave himself to it. And after a while, at first, he had some real interesting experiences, but after a while, he started really struggling, trying to maintain concentration. And he said, I don't know what to do. Do I push harder? Or is this a technique that's really not for me? He was saying, is there something I'm not in touch with yet? Or have I come to the end of the road on this particular technique? Of course, I couldn't tell him, or I wasn't willing to tell him, because some traditions are happy to tell you whatever you should practice at any given time. But I keep coming back to the allegory of the Buddha. When the Buddha first had his call for awakening, he set off and he studied with local teachers. And as the story goes, he tried lots of different techniques. In the beginning, the practices were all about austerity and self-denial. And eventually he came to realize that these practices of very intense austerity and self-denial, that they weren't really helping him. He was having powerful experiences, for sure, but he realized they didn't seem to lead to true awakening. Because what he was really interested in was, what is it that is beyond sickness, old age, death, and change? And I'm wondering if you can relate to this whole thing. You know, are you engaging into some disciplines because they're good for you? Are you sticking with them and sensing maybe this isn't working for me? Maybe this isn't right. Yeah, am I engaging into something that isn't really fully right for me right now? How do you discern your path? How do you discern the difference between stepping up, discipline, rigor, focus, resilience, and when it's time to let it all go? So one way to think of your path is first to know the goal. What's the outcome? What's the destination for your journey? Where are you actually going? And then once you know where you're going, then you choose your route. You look at some maps, you read some travel guides. You look for the places to avoid, the places that are really, really interesting, the must-see places when you're on your journey. And then you kind of set off. In a sense, I like to think of this as when you're on a spiritual path, it's not the path. It's your path. You have to determine and experiment what's next. But it's so important to first have that sense of the goal. What is it that you are seeking? And in this particular tradition, and in all traditions, we're fortunate to have some maps. Those who have been on the journey before us and articulated some of the things to look out for, some of the things to cultivate. But still, ultimately, with all the different choices we have, it really comes down to refining your sense of self-awareness and self-diagnosis. And would you benefit from concentration and gathering and cultivating a real profound sense of here and now? Would you benefit from more of this sense of cultivating non-judging awareness so you can see more into the patterns of life and how you're relating to them? Are you drawn to the practices of surrender, of simply letting be? Knowing what works for you is really, really helpful. And I've noticed for myself, given my personality structure and so forth, that I really thrive in structure. I've got a pretty creative, freewheeling kind of mind. And it actually does really well when it has accountability. It's kind of like writing a haiku. Okay, you've got 17 syllables. Not 16, not 18, 17 syllables. How can you pour your creativity into that focused mold? That kind of works for me. So I have kind of a narrow, if you will, a narrow lifestyle. For me, I like to go to bed at 8:30 and get up at 4:30, and I'd like to design my life around practice and creativity and service. But others are very different. Their chronotype is different. The practices that enliven them are different. And ultimately, it comes down to those words that were allegedly uttered by the Buddha on his deathbed. To be a light unto yourself. Do not look for another to tell you what to do, but find that light within. Here's the challenge, though. When you're in fear, you can't access that inner knowing. And quite often you'll be tossed around by the restless, unsettled mind. When I did my very first Vipassana retreat, quite a few decades ago now, gosh, yeah, long time ago, 30 some years ago. At that time, when I went off to this retreat, I was living in an ashram, living in a spiritual community, and I was really dissatisfied there. But I was also terrified about leaving. I wasn't sure what I would do. And so I sat that a lot of that retreat was trying to figure out what I was going to do with the rest of my life. And I went through what I noticed was a very predictable pattern. I would be meditating, I think, that's it. I'll finish my PhD and then I'll do an academic lifestyle. And I'd feel this rush of elation and feel like, yes, that's the path for me. And then it would fade and I'd kind of sense the emptiness of it. And then I think, oh, I'll go back to my travels and photography and wander the world and go off in that fantasy of how great that would be. And then that would fade. And then I think, I'll just find some place I love to live and I'll set up a storefront and I'll kind of do my healing stuff. And again, feel the rush. That's it. I'll do that. And then feeling that fade. I'll be a chiropractor and then watching that pass through. I'll raise a family and that would pass through. Finally, I began to sense it wasn't about coming up with the answer. As I was watching the rise and fall of excitement and the story and the whole compulsion around creating something wonderful, and then sitting with it and feeling the inherent emptiness of that whole story, I began to feel a little depressed and a little bit despairing. And finally, I started to get a glimpse, and really only a glimpse, of the lens that I was looking through. And the lens was fear and anxiety. I didn't really come to any resolution around that, but I must say something, because I was trapped in this 10-day retreat with no eye contact, no reading, no writing, etc., something settled. And I think what settled was also the strengthening of what we can think of as the witness. This sense of self-observation without judgment. And as I returned back to the community, it turned out that a lot of what I wanted to do was actually kind of available to me already. I didn't quite see it. But that was a very, very interesting shift. And maybe you've noticed this, that out of anxiety, you start to leap at things that are going to soothe your anxiety. And perhaps you know people who maybe ended a relationship and they immediately jumped into another relationship, or someone who retires and they immediately start flipping houses. There was a time when I was transitioning from a kind of a big job into I wasn't sure yet, and shared with a mentor of mine and told him I was letting go of this job. And the first thing he said, and he knew me well, he said, that's fantastic, but now I want to see if you have the cojones not to grab the first shiny thing that comes your way. The best advice I ever could have gotten. Because like every human being on the planet, when we're frightened, we react. Stimulus response. Mindfulness is about opening up that stimulus response. It's the willingness to kind of hang out between the trapeze bars and to really ask yourself, this next trapeze bar coming my way, is this really my trapeze bar? It takes a tremendous amount of courage. There really is, I really do see this as a path of self-awareness and self-diagnosis. In essence, what's happening right now? Can I name this inner state? That question is the question of wisdom, to see what's there. And then the next question, how does this want me to be with it? Or how can I be with this? And that opens up the whole inquiry around loving presence. And quite often, and certainly it's fueled by our culture now, our instinct is to react. And there's enormous power in learning how to pause, or training yourself to step back. When I'm in the occasional dispute with my lovely wife, there's something that she says that can bring up a sense of inner dread in me. And they're these words: let's slow this down a little bit. There's always this sense of like, oh no, can't I just be right for a little bit longer? This slowing down is not easy. You may know that acronym of WAIT, W-A-I-T. Why am I talking? Slowing down. Training ourselves to pause. And it's very easy to think of meditation and even mindfulness as a path of self-improvement. You meditate and you'll think clearer. Meditate, you'll be more physically balanced and you'll live from a place of greater homeostasis inside. Or meditate and your intuition will become more refined. There's this inevitable sense of taking this practice as a practice of doing, as kind of a practice of self-improvement. And there's certainly nothing wrong with that. And absolutely, there really is this sense of self-improvement, at least certainly in my life, and those who I have explored with, that there's some great benefit in really giving yourself this discipline of learning how to come into the present moment, learning how to establish this sense of non-judging awareness and exploring what it means to let things be. However, what can happen sometimes is we meditate to change our state. I'm certainly aware of this for myself, that I know that if I meditate in the morning, I'm going to feel a little more clearer, I'm going to be a little more successful, and that's going to kind of move me forward in life. But then what is the purpose of meditation ultimately? Is it about self-improvement? Is it about being able to do better, more skillfully? Or is it about being fully awake to reality? I don't think they're mutually exclusive, but I do think there is that sense of I'm meditating because it's good for me. But it points toward this sense of what it means to really just simply be awareness itself. To let go of, to truly let go of effort and allow yourself to experience what it means to be in that space of awareness itself. It's articulated beautifully in certain traditions. I've always loved the lines from the third Zen patriarch. It is a beautiful, full treatise, but perhaps the most famous lines are that the great way is not difficult for those who have no preferences. When you think of that preferenceless awareness is open space. So the great way is not difficult for those who have no preferences. It goes on. When love and hate are both absent, everything becomes clear and undisguised. Make the smallest distinction, however, and heaven and earth are set infinitely apart. So it's almost like there's almost this kind of a dichotomy. There's the linear comparing mind that's designed to do and get results. And then there's this other space, the absence of love and hate, the absence of good and bad. And in that state, everything becomes clear and undisguised. This is the path of stepping back. So I'd like to read you something from Sri Nisargadatta, who's a beautiful non-dual teacher. And these are just a few lines that they point in this direction of being and stepping back. If you like, you can close your eyes and just let these words kind of wash through. And I'll give you a little bit of space between the lines. This is speaking of awareness and speaking of this practice of paying attention. You might take 3 slow, deep breaths. This has nothing to do with effort. Just look between the thoughts rather than at the thoughts. When you happen to walk in a crowd, you do not fight every person you meet. You just find your way between. But when you fight, you invite a fight. But when you do not resist, you meet no resistance. When you refuse to play the game, you are out of it. Reflecting on these words. As you watch your mind, you discover yourself as the watcher. When you stand motionless, only watching, you discover yourself as the light behind the watcher. And can you sense in these few moments here who you are as the watcher? And can you imagine, if just for a moment, who you are as the light behind the watcher? If you like, you can deepen your breath. If you like, you can open your eyes, or you can remain with them closed. When I hear those words and when I reflect on those words, there's something pretty esoteric. To sense who you are as the light behind the watchers. It's something we can only glimpse, we can only intuit. And yet we know there's something there. I was raised a Quaker, and they have the great line, don't just do something, sit there. Like, watch that impulse to act and just sit there. The other analogy that's often used is imagine your mind like a glass of muddy water. If you take that muddy water and you just place it on the countertop and leave it there, over time, the silt will begin to settle. The water becomes clear. And so there's something here about training ourselves to refrain from the impulsive reactivity to stimulation. It can be a life changer. But it also has some challenges. It's fraught with some challenges here, because if we're not in balance, if you take stepping back to an excess, it can start to look like disassociation or disconnection or indifference or apathy. So while there's tremendous power in stepping back, when do you step up? And how do you step up, not from a place of reactivity, but how can you step up informed by wisdom and compassion or loving presence? And herein lies the dance. Thoreau, one of the American transcendentalists, was really big into social activism. And at one point, he was refusing to pay his taxes. And so he was put in prison. He was visited by Ralph Waldo Emerson, one of his good friends, who was appalled to see Thoreau in prison. And he came to visit Thoreau, and he said, "What are you doing in there?" Thoreau said, "What are you doing out there?" Now, there's something about stepping up, about taking action. And sometimes I think of it as your path, your dharma. And how I like to think of it is like your path ultimately is what you can't not do. For Thoreau, I'm assuming, as he looked at his options, he couldn't not do that protest. It was something he had to do. It just came and arose spontaneously. I was thinking about this, and I was reminded of a number of years ago. I was driving down to Arlington for this Monday night class, and I was getting a bite to eat beforehand. And as I was driving down one of the main thoroughfares, I was watching this woman on her bike, and she had some kind of a special bike. She always had some physical disability. And as she was moving across an intersection, I watched a black Acura turn and plow right into her. And I watched her go up over the hood and then fall on the street. Instinctively, I pulled my car over, and I just got out and I ran over to be with her. And she was lying on her back, and it was obvious she was both frantic and also beginning to kind of disassociate a little bit. And I just kneeled down on the pavement. First of all, just make sure she was safe. And then I just talked to her. And I just said, my name is Jonathan. What's your name? You've had quite a spill here, and what I'd like to do is just to kind of support you until they come to check on you. And so I asked her, would you feel more comfortable with your eyes open or your eyes closed? And she said, I'd be more comfortable with my eyes closed. And then I just asked her, I said, I'm just going to tell you what's going on so you know it's happening, but you don't have to deal with it. And then I'm just going to ask you a couple of things with how you're doing, and I asked her some of the questions that are, somewhat trauma related, like, where don't you feel it, and kind of got her anchored and where she felt okay. And I kind of described what was happening. And I was so absorbed, it was just me and her. At one point, I kind of looked up to see if if EMS was there, and I just saw there a bunch of people standing around looking at me going, what is he doing? And then when the EMS came, they were like, who the heck are you? But then eventually I said goodbye. I kind of handed her over to the ambulance folks. And I was afterward, I was just struck how that was kind of a choiceless choice, that moment, where I could have kept driving. I could have, done any number of things, but in that moment, I really didn't have a choice. I just felt like I needed to go over and make sure she was okay. And part of that was because I'd seen other accidents where people were just hysterical, and the people who were injured weren't really getting attention. And so your path is what you can't not do. And all of us are called to action in different ways. You've got worldly responsibilities. But part of the question is, what is the action that's really informed, not out of fear and not out of anxiety, but what really most calls you? So I'd like to lead just a little reflection, if you're open to it. If you like, you can close your eyes. And you might take 3 slow and full deep breaths. And when you think of your path, of your journey through this life, what would you say is most important in your life right now? With all the options that are available to you in your life right now, do you have a sense of what it is you can't not do? And one more little inquiry. If you could imagine 102 years old on your rocking chair, looking back over your life, what would you imagine would be most important? If you like, you can deepen your breath. And if you like, you can open your eyes or again remain with them closed. There's a great phrase that says, finding your dharma is your dharma. Finding your path is your path. I think it's safe to say we live in times of tremendous upheaval now, between all the cultural upheaval, the climate change. So many issues that are alive right now. And then the question becomes, is it more skillful to sit back and to settle and immerse yourself in that vast open space of awareness? Is it more skillful to step up and take action, to be a voice of those who don't have one? Different schools say different things. When you go on a 3-year retreat in some Tibetan traditions, they tell you at the beginning of the retreat, during these 3 years, people you love will die. You will be called in different ways to move into the world. Your commitment is to rest in open awareness and presence. There are those who say, all there is in life is action. Let your actions be as enlightened as possible. There is no thing as enlightenment. There are only enlightened actions. So perhaps there's a balance in here. So we can look around to those around us. Mahatma Gandhi quite famously said, those who believe in religion and politics, those who believe religion and politics are not connected, don't understand either. As you become more self-aware, you naturally become more aware of your suffering, of your capacity for freedom. And it's impossible to not become aware of the suffering around you and the possibility of freedom in those around you as well. So how do you do that dance? There's a great analogy of the dog barking as the stagecoach is going at full speed just before going off a cliff. No one hears the dog. When I think of people like Rachel Carlson, who wrote her book, Warning of Climate Change, way back in the 60s. Did we hear that voice? Are we really listening to the voices of suffering in our culture right now? And personally, the question for me is, could I do more? And maybe it's not could I do more, but how do I best serve? At the end of my life, what would it mean to look back and live without regret? When I think of the authoritarian regimes throughout history, how many well-meaning people did not take action out of fear? So if you have or will have grandchildren and they ask, how did you live your life given all that was going on in the world? What would you like to say? And so ultimately, it comes down to this balance, I think, to fill your cup. Let yourself serve from a place of fullness. However, there's a near enemy, because filling your cup has got a near enemy of self-indulgence, where you can begin to numb yourself to the needs of others and simply focus on yourself. Taking action and being service to others has a noble side, but it also has a near enemy of living out of reactivity and perhaps not being as skillful as you could be. So ultimately, I think it really comes down to the message from Smokey the Bear. Only you can prevent forest fires. Only you can know when it's time to step back and when it's time to step up. And the only way you'll know what is skillful is to fully engage, to practice and experiment. I don't know how they do it now, but it used to be, at least my understanding is, that when a plane would fly from, say, New York to Paris, and when it would be put on autopilot, that there'd be a radio beacon. And when the plane would veer a little to the left, they'd get a little signal, and then it would come back. It would veer a little to the right, it would get a signal and come back. So actually, for most of the journey, it's actually off course. It's self-correcting. And I think that's a really wonderful analogy for us as we practice, particularly as you explore the power of stepping back, the potency of stepping up, that what you will find is this feedback. What is skillful? When am I disengaging in a way that's truly helpful? And when is that disengagement some form of disassociation? When am I stepping in? And when is that skillful and effective? And when does it become myself becoming more and more activated and reactive? There's no easy answer, but perhaps the greatest tool we have is to really listen within. That wonderful line that the body doesn't lie. To deeply take time to really, really listen inside. What feels most wholesome right now? Is this a time for me to disengage and renew and fill my cup? Is this a time for me to step forward? Why don't we take just a few minutes for a short and brief reflection? You might take 3 slow and full deep breaths right now. The great way is not difficult for those who have no preferences. When love and hate are both absent, everything becomes clear and undisguised. Make the slightest distinction, however, and heaven and earth are set infinitely apart. And you might, in these moments, take a moment to soften and relax and feel. And you might, in your own way, wish yourself well in your journey. May you be guided by wisdom, and by loving presence. May your life, may your actions, and your resonant heart be of benefit to those in your inner circle. To those you work with and serve, and to all beings in all directions without discrimination. And again, taking 3 slow and full deep breaths. As you're ready, you can deepen the breath. And you can let your eyes open. Thank you so much for taking the time for practice tonight. I hope this is helpful in some way. May your pauses be deeply refreshing and renewing. May your actions feel wholesome and move you toward what is most important in your life. Thank you so much, and many, many blessings.